I don't want to accuse my brethren in the fourth estate of being un-American or unpatriotic, but there's this tone like, damn, the numbers are good
Right.
again this month.
Welcome to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM for Tuesday, May 13th. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I'm joined by RCP co-founder and president Tom Bevan and Washington Bureau Chief Carl Cannon. So, gentlemen, we're going to talk about the Trump trip to the Middle East a little later in the program, but I want to start with some economic news, and that is that we now have new inflation numbers out today that show inflation cooling for the third straight month. Consumer prices rose 2.3% in April. That's the smallest increase in more than 4 years. And grocery prices actually declined between March and April. So good news overall, Tom. What do you make of the new numbers, and what do you think it means for Donald Trump?
Well, I would have sworn by all of the media coverage of the tariffs and whatnot that inflation would be, out of control and prices would be out of control and Trump is wrecking the economy. But apparently he's not. I mean, these numbers are pretty
Not
good.
yet.
Not yet. Okay. I guess it's still coming. Armageddon is still out there. No, but I mean there is a disconnect with, I think, the way that Trump's presidency has been covered and what the implications of some of his policies would be. And they're just not, the premonitions, the predictions are not coming true. And so this is a good number. I mean, it's as you mentioned, the lowest since 2021 annual increase. And so I think that administration feels like they're on the right track. And certainly, look, the public polling doesn't necessarily reflect. I mean, Trump's numbers on the economy are not great, and this will probably give him a little bit of a boost.
Carl, you see it that way?
Well, he was in Saudi Arabia today, and he went through his litany. We have the greatest economy in the history of the world. That's actually a direct quote. And he said, prices are down, grocery prices are down. He started going through all his familiar litany, and I thought, he says that no matter what's going on. But in this case, it was true. And we've seen, I guess the inflation rate has declined now for the third straight month. I mean, Tom's right. If you just watched MSNBC and CNN or the networks, or you just read the Post or the New York Post, the Washington Post or the New York Times, you'd think the economy was in free fall. Trump had cratered the economy. He'd done it on purpose. He had no plan. We're in a recession, maybe a depression. That's what you'd think. And so when I see these poll numbers, the American people are being told the economy sucks, but there's no real evidence for that. And so I don't know if his poll numbers are coming back. We have these parallel universe, the facts, and then what each political party believes on any given issue, and they rarely dovetail in any way. But in this case, what Trump is saying about the economy, it's not the greatest economy in the history of the world, but it's robust and doing better since he's been president. And he's over there signing deals and getting a new investment. And I have to say that when we fact check Trump a lot. The Washington Post had 47,000 lies or deceptions he's given, but when he's telling the truth, we ought to point that out. I think we owe it to our listeners to do that. And right now the economy seems like it's doing well.
Well, Tom, I did read some of that mainstream coverage that Carl was referring to. And the sort of general impression is that, yes, but there's sort of a feeling that this may be the calm before the storm. Layered on top of that is the idea that we may have dodged a bullet by him blinking in the tariff wars, if you want to put it that way. And I guess where the rubber meets the road is with the Federal Reserve, which is sort of maintaining this wait and see attitude on interest rates because they're not sure what's going to happen next. You're laughing.
I was laughing at Trump's Jerome too late Powell,
right, yeah.
As Trump has given him the nickname. Yeah, look, to Carl's point, to your point, the coverage is almost, even as they're reporting these numbers, which they are, but it's almost in a begrudging way. It's like, oh, well, this isn't an accurate reflection. And it is the calm before the storm. He has wrecked the economy. It's coming, Chicken Little. But as you mentioned, this is the third straight month that prices have come down. And so I think we have to just sort of report the facts as they are and not try and suggest or slant the coverage in some way that seems, presents it in some sort of negative light, as if this is, the worst is still to come. It may be. We don't know that. It could actually get better. I mean,
Well, Tom and Andy, I've detected almost something a little different. I don't want to accuse my brethren in the fourth estate of being un-American or unpatriotic, but there's this tone like, damn, the numbers are
right.
good again this month. This is terrible.
Yeah. Well, all right, look, I got to talk about this other thing. And we've got a lot to get through today, but I do want to get to this story. And that is this new book. It's the latest Biden book. It's called Original Sin, President Biden's Decline, Its Cover-Up and His Disastrous Choice to Run Again. It's by Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson. Tom, this came out. One excerpt in Axios talks about how White House aides were discussing whether or not he would need a wheelchair due to the degeneration of his spine. Other things are sort of leaking out about the book. What are you hearing about the book, and what's your impression?
My impression is that, and I've seen some clips of Jake Tapper's doing the rounds and giving interviews to his colleagues at CNN and elsewhere about how the White House lied about this. They lied to the media. They lied to Democrats. They were lying to everyone. And there is some truth to that. The White House was being completely dishonest and trying to, present Biden in the best possible light. However, the problem with that is that, it was there for everybody to see. I mean, you saw this happening with your own eyes. You saw him fall down on the stage, fall down the stairs. You saw him mangle his words, every single time he took the stage almost, and do all of these bizarre things. And the White House would lie and say, oh, it's just a stutter, it's just, it's no problem. And what would the media do? Instead of being critical and saying, clearly, it's not a stutter. We can see that it's not a stutter. So what's the actual explanation? They just dutifully reported that it was a stutter. And, for Jake Tapper to be there and Alex Thompson did do some reporting on this. And I feel like, Jake Tapper sort of using him as a shield, because I'm not sure Jake Tapper did a bunch of reporting during the time. In fact, there are clips of him actually doing the opposite, with Laura Trump, where he's, upbraiding her on live television for suggesting that Joe Biden, it wasn't a stutter, and, trying to shame her publicly. So he was complicit in this. A lot of the media was complicit in this. And even though you could say the White House was lying about it or shading the truth or protecting Biden, the media didn't have to go along with it. And they did.
Almost a rant, Tom. That wasn't quite a media rant. So
it was low on the rant scale today.
Yeah, low on the rant scale today. But Carl, the other thing that I read in one of the excerpts was that maybe it was on CNN, that when he was at the that he didn't know who George Clooney was when he met George Clooney at the in that fundraiser about 2 weeks before the debate.
Well, come on, let's be fair. He's older than most presidents. He'd probably know Humphrey Bogart,
You think?
A shorter version of Tom's rant was the Babylon Bee today, and they had their headline on their story was Jake Tapper uncovers startling evidence that Biden's decline was covered up by Jake Tapper. And I think that's that. Look, I don't want to pick on Jake. I mean, better late than never. But his point, though, is a serious one, and that is that reporters can't speculate about the mental health of a president. I'd covered Biden for years. I never heard this thing about stuttering till he was president or late in his vice presidency. He broke his ankle when he was first president, so that's why he was shuffling, not because he's old. They went out these sharp as attack thing. The White House press secretary upbraided reporters from the podium who asked about this. All of these things were, he's worn out from a trip. He has a cold. These were excuses that turns out to be transparent and really deceptions. And it raises a larger question of, so the White House, are there minutes of the meeting? Are there emails that are going to come out later where they talked about this openly among each other about how to basically cover up the president's cognitive decline? Because you start thinking about what that entails. And these executive orders, did Joe Biden really write them? Did he even really know what was in them? There's a lot there. And I think that I think in a sense, look, Jake Tapper makes a lot of money. He's works hard. He's got a healthy ego. He can take care of himself. But blaming the press for this, Tom, there's something to what you're saying. But there's a larger question of this organized deception by the top levels of the Democratic Party, if that's what it is, that I think we ought to keep exploring and get to the bottom of, because you think about the implications of what they did. It doesn't strike me as, well, strikes me as maybe not an indictable offense, but certainly a mortal sin.
Well, Tom, this is from Axios. This was a unattributed Biden spokesperson. This is sort of a challenge as well as a denial. He said, "We are still waiting for anyone to point out where Joe Biden had to make a presidential decision or make a presidential address where he was unable to do his job because of mental decline. In fact, the evidence points to the opposite. He was an effective president." Do you think we'll get the kind of evidence that this guy seems like he's saying it's not out there, but maybe it is?
Maybe not. I mean, to Carl's, I'm sure if we had minutes of meetings or recordings of meetings that this kind of stuff was discussed. I mean, I think the auto pen is probably the closest that we have gotten to a situation where it's very possible that Joe Biden was not aware of things that were his signature was being used to sign orders and affect government policy that he might have been oblivious to. But again, this idea that, he can be he's clearly, got issues, right? There's mental decline there. And, we saw the stories. It was like, oh, Biden's best between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. That's it. He can't, it's like, so you're telling me that at 9 a.m. or 8 a.m., I mean, the presidency is a 24/7 job. He gets a phone call at 3 a.m. and he's sharp as a tack dealing with matters of national security. Are you telling me that he wasn't ever affected by that? I mean, it doesn't seem to pass the smell test to me that they can just sort of cordon off his mental decline and say, well, yeah, he forgot names and he forgot stuff and he shuffled around and he wasn't very sharp sometimes. But whenever he was doing the job, man, he was really on it and he was, a really effective president. I mean, that just seems like total bullshit to me.
All right. Well, we're going to have to take a break. We're going to leave it there. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Carl and Tom. Don't go away. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and Carl. And Carl, David Hogg may be on his way out at the DNC. He was in hot water because he said he would raise about $20 million to primary moderate Democratic House members in the safe blue districts. But the proximate cause of his troubles now are that his election was run afoul of DNC's rules on gender equity. I think that I got that right. Carl, what's the problem?
Well, that's just a pretext. They want him out of there because they don't want some young guy just out of college raising money to primary people who he calls moderates, but are actually very liberal people in good standing and have done a lot of work for the Democratic Party, being punished by either somebody far to the left or far younger that, they don't, it's not what political parties do. This was taking the AOC model and replicating it nationally. And nobody wants that. So they're looking for an excuse to get rid of him. So they come up with this, this idea that you have to have, two minorities. You can't just have a white male as the chairman of the party and vice chairman. That the election was somehow flawed. It's not a good look for Democrats to have a young guy saying he's going to primary older members who've done things for the party he doesn't even know about. It's also not a good look for the Democratic Party to say that elections don't matter. I mean, they just nominated somebody without a primary. You saw how how that went over. I think that the Democratic Party should maybe get back to democratic principles. This guy won, and that'll let him serve. Then maybe pull him aside and have talk to him. But I think vacating the election is also problematic.
Well, this challenge, Tom, came about before he started talking about doing these Democratic challenges. So this is an Oklahoma DNC member, Kalen Free, who said that the election didn't reflect their rules about gender equity. So they're using that as sort of an excuse, I guess, to get rid of him over a substantive issue, not a procedural issue.
Well, listen, I had a solution for David Hogg, and he did not take my advice. I told him if you just transition, he could cut this off and stop it in its tracks, but he did not take my advice, and now it appears like it's too late. They have clearly, this panel has moved against him, and so it looks like he's going to be out. But I agree with Carl. It wasn't a good look to have him running around and doing all these interviews. He was on Bill Maher. He was on a podcast with James Carville. He was on ABC This Week, mixing it up with like Donna Brazile, and he was stirring the pot among Democrats and ruffling feathers. And so that was problematic for them. But at the same time, to just basically sort of, I know you said this was filed before, whatever, but now it looks like they're basically sort of reneging on the deal and taking it back and using this procedural trick to get him out, and it looks like it's going to work. So it is not a good look.
Carl, what do they do next, though? I mean, here's the problem they have. If they go with this sort of procedural issue and say, okay, we're going to have a new election, I guess, or something, because we want to have the right gender balance and we have to know how to count not only, I think part of the problem was they didn't know how to count non-binary candidates. Did they just look silly? Because basically, why didn't they just like slap him on the top of his little head and say, you got to stop doing this or we're going to throw you out? Or
my guess
is some other way to get rid of somebody, right?
My guess is they tried that and he didn't take the hint or didn't take the instructions or just told him to buzz off. Look, Kalen Free's a serious person, Native American, and she's. My guess is they're going to replace him with her. I will see how that goes, but it's not. They need this gambit of his struck these people as deeply unserious. The Democratic Party's problem isn't that people don't think it's progressive enough. Now, using a woke stratagem to get rid of him, sort of plays into it. But I think once they get their person in place, and they'll announce as a unified leadership of the DNC, we're trying to fight Republicans here. We're trying to fight Donald Trump. We're not really trying to fight each other. They need every vote they can get. They need every person they can get. They have a minority in the Senate and the House. They don't control the White House. And Donald Trump came very close to getting a majority of the popular vote. So I think what the Democrats want to do is get this distraction out of the way and come up with a unified message. It's hard to do when you don't have a nominee because our system, and this has gotten more pronounced over time, but the president or the presidential nominee, we use that phrase, titular head of the Democratic Party, Republican Party. Well, they're more than the titular head. They're the head. President, the nominee, puts the people in place at the DNC. They have their apparatus, and they came up with their message. And right now, the Democrats don't have, a message that a lot of people understand. Is Tim Walz goes around, I'm looking at my phone, Tesla stock's going down.
Here it comes.
While people are firebombing Tesla dealerships, is that their message? No. Or is their message, we've got to talk we got to reach across the aisle. Lanny Davis has a book coming out. We're publishing it, in which he'll
come on.
And what's the solution, Carl?
Come on, Carl. You're almost there.
Well, that's what I had to say.
Wow. Carl's teasing us today. He will not go there. He will not say the G word in this podcast. I do have to say, though, there were a couple stories out last week, and I mean, this is going to be. So Ruben Gallego went to Pennsylvania and had a town hall and gave some, sort of tough medicine to Democrats. And then there was a story about Wes Moore and how he's rising in the presidential ranks. I mean, this is going to be an absolute, demolition derby. I mean, there could be 25 candidates because, as we've talked about before, the barriers to entry now are pretty low. Everybody thinks they've got what it takes to be president, and so you're going to have a whole host of candidates, including the G guy, Gavin Newsom. I'll say it. Go ahead, everybody drink. Running in 2020, it's going to be, and it really is going to be fascinating to watch how the Democrats react to all that.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Gavin Newsom, I'll say his name as well. I'm going to talk to Susan Crabtree a little later in the show about Gavin Newsom and some of the some problems he's having
so
right now.
If you're playing the Gavin Newsom drinking game on the Real Clear Politics podcast, you better have a full beer or bottle or something.
Right. All right. Well, we're going to leave it there. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and Carl. Don't go away. We'll be back after this.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP, joined now by Josh Kraushaar. He's the editor-in-chief of Jewish Insider. Josh, thanks for joining us.
Tom, it's great to be back with you.
It is great to have you, Josh. It's been a while. So let's start with Trump's Middle East trip. He's obviously visiting that region for the first time in his second term and is not going to Israel this time, noticeably. What should people be reading into that, if anything? And how would you characterize the current U.S.-Israeli relationship?
Well, look, it comes at a positive point where the U.S. and the Trump administration played a key role in the release of the last living American-Israeli hostage in Adon Alexander, who, Steve Witkoff, Trump's Middle East negotiator, really played a key role and had some really made for TV photo ops in embracing the family, and it was a really emotional moment. So the trip does come at a point where at least one of the hostages, who's been held for well over a year by Hamas, was released, and that was in large part because of Witkoff and Adam Bowler, the Trump hostage negotiator. That's the good news. The challenging news is that the U.S.-Israel relationship on a lot of policy issues is a little bit on the rocks. There was a lot of frustration in Israel that the American administration announced that it wasn't going to be going after the Houthis last week. There is a little bit of tension and concern over the nature and state of the negotiations with Iran. The Israelis, many of them want to actually go after Iran's nuclear facilities. Trump is taking the diplomatic route. Remains to be seen where these negotiations are going to lead. And there's also, as Israel is mobilizing and trying to send, preparing to at least up the ante in Gaza and send troops in. Trump seems to want to be taking a diplomatic tack on that front as well. We'll see where things go this week. And finally, Tom, you noted Trump is not visiting Israel on this trip. Usually, the last time in this first term, when he visited Saudi Arabia and some of the same countries, Israel was part of the itinerary. This time, even though there's so many key issues that Israel and the U.S. could be talking about, that is notably not part of the agenda. So, I don't think there's any huge divide, but there is a lot of concern, especially among Israelis that really like Trump, about the nature of a lot of these issues that Israelis care very deeply about.
And obviously he had Bibi Netanyahu to the White House early on in his second term. But why did he not visit Israel? Do we have any reporting? Do we have any understanding why Israel was not on the agenda?
Well, one thing we've heard is that usually when you visit a country, you want a deliverable. You want to actually have something you can, tout. Now, Adon Alexander's release could have been one of those things, but is a little bit awkward on that front too, because Bibi Netanyahu was not particularly involved in the negotiations. So that would have created another layer of perhaps awkwardness. And it also, there are at least 20 remaining Israeli hostages alive too. And that's a little bit of a sticky wicket as well. So yeah, that's one factor. There's no deal. There's no deliverable that is ready to be announced.
No plane that Israel's.
Yeah, Israel. And maybe we wrote about this in Jewish Insider, that Trump seems this trip is less about geopolitics and much more about business deals. And maybe Israel should offer their own plane or do something, a sovereign wealth fund or something. I think that also concerns the Israelis though, because they're always every moment of every day, it's all about national security for good reason. And Trump seems to be this trip much more interested in the business deals.
All right, let's redirect the conversation back to politics at home, but on the same vein, we had talked about this on our show I think it was last week, all of these attacks on John Fetterman. and whether there's, it was his stance on Israel that precipitated this. And of course, his critics say, no, 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 of course not. That's not, has nothing to do with it. This is just, the fact of the reporting about his behavior behind the scenes. But Selena Zito has written, and others have suggested that was actually might have been one of the reasons that the Dems pulled the knives out. Do you buy that? Do you think that's part of what is driving the animus towards John Fetterman on the left?
Well, I think it's clear that there's a double standard. I remember very clearly, I was actually at Axios when John Fetterman had that infamous debate against Dr. Oz. And it was clear to everyone that he was not in good health. And we were one of the first publications to write a story. I wrote the story quoting, Democratic lawmakers that said even more concerning things about his state of his health during that debate. And the amount of pushback I got from the Fetterman camp, from Adam Jentelson, who was in that story, I don't need
the one who wrote the letter to the doctors. Yeah.
How dare you? Like, you are ableist. You are, a horrible person for noting the obvious. And now that these same people apparently are leaking details of the senator's health, which should be kept private. I don't think it's good for anyone's mental health for their public records to be leaked publicly in a major newspaper. I mean, the double standard is just appalling. Like, at least stand by one view or the other. And I think, look, I think there are a lot of reasons for why people are coming out now. John Fetterman lost a lot of staffers over the last, this is not a news story. He's definitely lost a lot of staffers. Jentelson was his chief of staff. He was one of the last major staffers to leave as part of that exodus. But there's no doubt that a lot of those staffers' views were at odds with Fetterman when it came to Israel, when it comes to a whole lot of other, I think Trump, he believes in supporting Trump where he agrees with him and disagreeing where he disagrees. But a lot of Democrats want to be part of the resistance and oppose the president on everything. So there's a lot of, I don't think it's just Israel. I think there are a lot of issues. But more importantly, the Democratic staffing and the base of the party is well to the left of where the party used to be. And to have someone like Fetterman, who is an outspoken voice of the middle, regardless of what his latest doctor's bill of health says, is something that really drives these people nuts. And you saw this with Sinema, former Senator Kirsten Sinema. You saw this with Joe Manchin, people leaking negative things about them when they didn't want to overturn the filibuster, for instance, and the leaks. Right. So this is a lot more to do with ideology, I believe, than anything about Fetterman's health.
We're speaking with Josh Kraushaar. He's the editor-in-chief of Jewish Insider. Josh, more broadly speaking, we saw the resurgence of campus protests at Columbia and other universities against Israel in favor of Palestine or Hamas, or however you want to characterize it. How big of a problem is that within the Democratic Party? The sort of anti-Semitic, either support for anti-Semitism, or at least, I guess a charitable way of saying it would be sort of, acknowledging it or turning the cheek or turning a blind eye to it. Is that just contained to a small section of the Democratic left, or is this something that Democrats are going to have to struggle with in the midterms and beyond?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lack of courage in confronting the issue, because it is a small percentage of the party activists, the people that you see screaming and yelling aren't a majority of the party, but they're afraid to confront the AOC wing of the party that either excuses it or indulges it or whataboutisms it.
But the AOC wing is ascendant. You agree with that, right?
Yeah, the AOC, well, it's ascendant, but it's not a majority, or far from a majority of the party, and it's going to be a challenge. I mean, when you look ahead, Tom, it's not just the issue of anti-Semitism. There's a whole plethora of issues that left activist faction of the party believes in that is utterly toxic in a general election. It might even be utterly toxic in a broad primary, right? I mean, moderate voters, we saw the results in a lot of deep blue areas, Chicago, New York City, and areas that were once almost unanimously Democratic turned a little bit to the right because of their disenchantment with where the left was on a lot of those issues, and anti-Semitism is one of them. So yeah, I think it's a real problem for the party, but it's less about, this is what a lot of lawmakers believe. It's more about that they're afraid to confront this activist left that is, yes, ascendant, but is still a pretty small minority, a loud but small minority of their party.
All right, we got just a minute or two left, Josh. So let's get your take on where do things stand. I mean, obviously, margins in the House very very slim for Republicans. I think that I mean, correct me if you feel differently, but I think that the sort of conventional wisdom is that Democrats are probably favored to win the House. Senate's a different story, but where do you see things right now?
Yeah, I mean that's where the fundamentals are. It's very rare for a newly elected president's party to not suffer some losses in the midterms. I think Bush may have been the only time where that he went against the grain. Even Joe Biden, who had a good midterm in 2022, still lost seats in that election in the House. So the margins for the Republicans are so small, even a very modest loss could flip the lower chamber to the Democrats. So, betting odds would suggest Democrats are favored to retake the House, but whether it's a wave, whether it's a more modest gain, whether if Republicans can beat the odds because of the way Trump's unique popularity. You never know with Trump. It's not easy to bet 2 years out when it comes to Donald Trump.
If you were setting those odds, what would you set them at, Josh? Not to try, I'm trying to pin you down a little bit here. We won't hold you to this. I mean, the internet's forever, but whatever.
Yeah, I mean, look, 65%. I think Democrats bet you didn't put percentage on it.
Yep.
But I could easily see Democrats having the way that you don't have as many competitive House seats as you did, a decade ago. They're not going to be quite as many battlegrounds. So I certainly could see Democrats not having a huge night like they did in 2018, even if they win back the lower chamber. I mean, the Senate is much more favorable also on fundamentals for the Republicans because they have 53 seats right now. Democrats need to win up 4 seats, net 4 seats to get the majority. And after, you've got North Carolina, Tom Tillis, probably the most vulnerable Republican senator on the ballot. Susan Collins in Maine. I think Susan Collins, she's one of the most battle-tested politicians I've ever covered, but maybe she retires. Maybe, there's a big wave and it's different. That's going to be a state to watch at least. So that's 2 seats. But after those 2, then it's a little bit slim pickings for the Democrats, right? I mean,
Texas going blue again, Josh. Come on.
Well, you got the map. I mean, if you're looking at this, it's kind of like a Mel Kiper with my, draft board. But, after those 2, to get to 4, they would need Ohio or Florida, right? I mean, those are seats where you have an appointed senator, Ashley Moody in Florida, and the former lieutenant governor in Ohio. And then, Texas is the other state I'm watching. John Cornyn, I think, faces a serious challenge in that primary by the very right-wing Attorney General, Ken Paxton. There is some concern that if Ken Paxton is the nominee, Texas should be a gimme for Republicans, but if Paxton ends up being the Republican nominee, there's an outside chance Democrats could play big in Texas.
All right. We are going to leave it there. Josh Kraushaar, editor-in-chief of Jewish Insider. Josh, always great to have you. Thanks.
Thanks, Tom.
All right. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM after this.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I'm joined now by Susan Crabtree, national political correspondent for RCP. She's also the author of the new book on California politics, Fool's Gold: The Radicals, Con Artists, and Traitors Who Killed the California Dream and Now Threaten Us All. Susan, welcome back to the program.
Thanks so much for having me, Andy. It's a mouthful, I know.
Well, I love the title. Gavin Newsom, your governor's in the news. Let's start with that. The cost of health care in his latest state budget, it's exploded in the wake of his decision to provide free medical services to about 1.6 million illegal aliens. This has all just come out in the budget. What happened? And how is this a surprise? I mean, if you massively expand the coverage, it would seem to me that you should anticipate that the cost would go up.
Well, it's interesting to me that they didn't know that it would be so much more expensive to insure illegal immigrants versus legal immigrants. I guess it's 70% more to fund the illegal immigrant insurance. And they didn't realize that they were doing younger. They were already insuring younger illegal immigrants. Gavin Newsom rolled this out over a course of several years. So in one of his first first budgets, he thought it was going to be $2.5 billion. He never really revealed the shortfall until this year, under heavy questioning from Republicans, that it was really $9.5 billion. The whole Medicare, it's called Medi-Cal in California, that it was going to be that. It exploded that much, and that he actually quietly was sent a letter to the state legislature, the Democratic-controlled, supermajority-controlled state legislature earlier this year, and said he had already taken out about a $3.4 billion loan to keep it running. But yeah, it shouldn't be a huge surprise. The sad thing is that Gavin Newsom took the state's budget. It was a huge surplus, even during COVID, and that has now just diminished wildly. He's given away a lot of things. When he was during a recall, he gave $300 to every person for the gas prices, for the spike in gasoline. So during COVID, there was a lot of money that was just misspent, and so now we have some people estimate it to a $68 billion budget shortfall.
Wow. So yeah, this is so interesting. So the original estimate is $2 billion and change, let's say. The real cost turns out to be almost $10 billion. It's a 4. So they missed it by a factor of 4. And then they go and they borrow quietly $3.4 billion, as you say, in order to sort of cover some of the shortfall. And then it's revealed that he needs to borrow about another $3 billion. So it's about $6 billion that they're putting together to cover these illegal aliens. Why is it more expensive to cover illegal immigrants than regular people? That I think is a little surprising to people, because the argument is always, well, these, one thing about illegals, they pay into the system, they don't get Social Security, they don't tax the social safety net, supposedly. But in this case, it kind of looks like they are taxing the Social Security net.
Well, I think that the legal immigrants have more subsidies for their own insurance from their employer. So that, I think that's the main culprit right there. And also it exploded, as I mentioned before, because he was at first just covering the younger individuals under age 26 and for emergency services like pregnancies. And so that older people have more healthcare costs, as we know, as you get sicker when you get older. So he didn't, his analysts were not doing the math correctly, and they under budgeted for older people. They get sicker.
Yeah. So let's also talk about this other thing, which just yesterday he was talking about the homeless crisis in California, and he has come up with, I guess, what they consider a model ordinance that he'd like local officials to adopt. What's the significance of this, and is it going to do anything to help solve the homeless problem in California, which is so bad?
Well, I think the problem is that this is a reversal for him. Now, he said this in the last 2 years. He's been blaming the states, the cities, and the counties, and he's been trying to get them to do more and build more shelters, but there's no legislation to force that. There simply aren't enough beds for people, because his focus, since he was mayor of San Francisco, has always been housing first. And in fact, some people argue that that is a subsidy. He provides the housing without in mandating that there be sobriety, that they go into mental health. Now, he's trying to turn that around in the last 2 years because he has his eye on the White House. But you can't, because the homelessness has spiraled 24% increase during his tenure in office. So his housing first policies that he's pursued and the rest of the Democrats in California state, the leadership, have pursued for 2 decades, cannot be reversed in 2 years. And there's no stick. Okay, there's no accountability. There's been $24 billion. Some people estimate it has gone up to $37 billion spent on homelessness during his time in office, and a state office that the legislature did mandate that there would be an audit, and they found that they couldn't track where the money went. There was no accountability, no tracking, no numbers of how many beds, how much housing was created for the homeless, and how much it helped them.
Yeah. So this ordinance, as I understand it, there's sort of 3 aspects to it. One is that it allows the locals to clear encampments in parks and city streets and that sort of thing. And I guess this is in part reaction to that Supreme Court decision, which allowed for this to happen. It requires the local officials to notify the homeless population and to provide alternatives to the extent they can. And the third thing, which I thought was interesting, it requires them to hold on to the homeless encampment to their personal belongings for 60 days, which is just kind of an interesting thing. I mean, you see those pictures of them sort of clearing an encampment. It looks like everything is being bulldozed. But according to the governor, he would like them to, if you've got personal items, bicycles or stuff like that, I guess, that the local local people should have to hold on to that so you can reclaim it. It seems, kind of like a reasonable set of rules. What's the reaction so far?
Well, I think the problem is the people who have studied this, like Michael Schellenberger, for years, he's saying that there's no, like I said before, there are not enough shelter beds. So he's putting this basically unfunded mandate on the counties, and there's no stick. So he said, you cannot charge them with any crime, the homeless people. So where do you put them? It's just like when he cleaned up the homeless in San Francisco for Chinese President Xi's visit. He just put them in a different spot of the city. So where are these people going to go? That's the real problem. And also, even when you do have shelters, he actually had this program, Gavin Newsom, where he turned motels into homeless shelters. But the people either at these hotels were, I have it in the book, became a terrible place to live. The mental health issue and the addiction issue was not addressed at all. They were rat infested. The LA Times did some good coverage of these, and they finally had to shut them down. Karen Bass actually had to shut one of these down, and then they're asking for more money to refurbish it. They're doubling down on those policies. You cannot address homelessness in California until you address the mental health issue and the addiction issue. And for decades, they haven't done it. And so even if they had enough shelter beds, what's mandating, what's going to keep the homeless people in the shelter beds? In California, have really good weather, so they don't like to be in these places, and they turn into these sort of hellscapes. So it's a huge problem, and he's trying to fix it in the last 2 years to reverse a decades-long philosophy that they were going to provide the housing first and not deal with the real problems that are causing homelessness in the first place. Yeah.
And you can't view any of this, and you're right, you're referring to the last 2 years, because he's may have national ambitions, let's say. And that a lot of people are seeing this through that lens. I saw this interesting LA Times poll just came out last week or so. And it was showing the popularity of governors in their local, among their constituents, basically focusing on those who might run for president. And this is what the poll said, and this is again from the LA Times. Newsom's got a 46% approval rating among his constituents, lower than Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania, lower than Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan, and Andy Beshear of Kentucky being a very red state, he's leading the pack. He's got a 68% approval rating. So, I mean, to Californians, it doesn't seem like they're that fond of him. And if you can't carry your state, or you're not popular in your own state, can you really run for president?
Well, certainly, I think the bench is not very wide in the Democratic side. So he is a very slick, really great, articulate guy, and he thinks he can just get by on that alone. And I have, as I said in the book, he's always been sort of just a performative person. He's never had to really. He got everything handed to him, including his wine business, where he made all of the millions from Getty oil money. So even his entry into college, he didn't earn it on his own. Jerry Brown, the former governor, had a letter accompanying his entrance into Santa Clara University. So it's just interesting to me that there is zero accountability. He tried to get this CARE Act passed. He's going in the right direction in terms of trying to provide mental health, but you have to deal with the whole conservator law, change that law. And the supermajority in the Democrat in the state legislature is not with him on this.
Right.
They consider this more punitive to clear the street, no matter what the Supreme Court said in that Oregon case. So he's trying to go to the middle now, but he can't erase the past. And he's still not addressing. There was, even last week, the head of the LA Housing Authority, it was found that she was putting her friends in, she was in charge of homeless, Karen Bass's #1 top person, that she was doing unethical things, putting unqualified people, moving unqualified people out, and moving her friends in, and destroying documents, and having Christmas parties with alcohol on the taxpayers' dime. And so this is just a microcosm of the problems, the lack of accountability in California.
All right. Well, we're going to have to leave it there. Susan, always great to have you on. I've been talking to Susan Crabtree. She's the RCP national correspondent. We're going to leave it there. I'm Andrew Walworth. You've been listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. We'll be back tomorrow. I hope you'll join us then. Have a great evening.